But that'd be one game. It wouldn't be a whole slate of games on Friday.
It would be, but I'm also going to use this to get on my soapbox and talk about that
No, I'm
MLS
with
should
you.
have a Friday night game.
I've said this for probably
Years.
a decade.
Yeah.
Peachtree Post
because
days.
they did it for a while
Mhm.
on Univision, and it was great, and I loved it, and it was something that I wish they had done more of. But one thing, are you telling the fans not to worry about the jumping up and down, or are you talking about the squad?
I'm telling the fans not to, like, you can't
Okay.
just stare at the table
Yeah,
8
yeah.
weeks to go. You can't stare at the table all night long while, like, Toronto and DC and a bunch of the other clubs have pulled up and blown up their sock and boppers and are beating the dog out of each other. All you can do is worry about the game that's in front of you. When it gets to like 4 weeks left in the season, if you really want to start staring at it, I won't begrudge you that. 8 weeks to go for me is just too far out to be like living and dying by where you are on the table. And I know it's a thing
early
that,
right now.
yeah, it's too early for this crap.
Too early, and right now Atlanta United is in the spot. Of course they want to be higher, but they're in the playoff spot. So if they take care of what's in front of them, then they should hold on to that spot. It's not going to be easy. You're playing a lot of the teams around you, but it's just this Eastern Conference is very difficult. And we can sit here and we can talk about the whole season long and this and that and this move and that move and blah, 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 blah. And you can just spin yourself into mediocrity and being upset. And that's not a healthy way to be. Like, the fact is, we can do the post-mortem when the season's done. Right now, it is about Charlotte. It's about Saturday night. It's about getting 3 points. And then it's about a break. And then it's about Nashville at home and getting 3 points. It has to be game by game. And what I see so often, and this isn't an Atlanta United conversation, this is just sports conversation. It's so easy to sit here and look at, well, I'm not going to enjoy what's happening right now because I'm still mad about that loss 3 weeks ago. Stop it. Stop it. You can do that later, and we will, and we'll have the conversation about what went wrong and what could have been different. We can do those hypotheticals later. But you have a game against a rival on Saturday night. It should be a really fun atmosphere in Charlotte. It should be a very, not hostile in a scary way, but in a really pushing Charlotte side of things. It should be one of those games that we get excited about why we're doing this, why we're spending our time watching these games, why we're running around calling and covering these games, why we do this. This is why. And that doesn't diminish because the team is further down in the table than you'd like them to be. That is just such a frustrating way to try to talk to anybody about what's going on. This team is this team. It's not 2018. It's not 2019. It's not 2022. It's not any of those. It's 2024. And the work that this group is putting in, and now you have another fun subplot to all of this, and watching an incredibly talented player in Alexei Miranchuk figure out how to fit into this team on the fly, because that's the situation you're in. You see this with big teams in Europe in early February after the window closes in midseason, and you've got to throw that top guy in there. And, fitness is a different issue in that situation in general, but you got to get them in the field. You don't have time to do all the work on the training pitch that you'd like to, and you've got to see them figure it out. And I thought it was so cool this week, Jay Fortune talking about it feeling like a pickup game with, you see what he can do and you try to figure out how to play with that and how to work with that and put him in good spots and how he can put you in good spots. That's a fun thing to watch, a smart, talented player figure it out on the fly. If he gets it right, this is going to be a fun team to watch down the stretch, because you would expect more chances. You would expect better chances. And hopefully you're going to find some goals, because right now, that's the difference. That's it. And it's not about even creating the chances. It's not like Rios and TRA have not done a good job in scoring. You've created so many chances over the course of the year that you're a top 5 team in chances created in XG and all those things. Your goal scoring is not there. Your record is not there. The Galaxy, who's a great attacking team, and Atlanta United going into Saturday night, XG, pretty much the same between the two. The goals scored, what about 13 or 14 difference? Well, that's the difference between being first in the West and being where Atlanta is, ninth in the East. That's it right now. And this is going to be a fun ride to see, can Miranchuk create better chances that end up in the back of the net a little more often? And can this team turn some of those draws into wins, some of those losses into draws, and some of those losses into wins? And if they do, they're going to be in the playoffs, and they're going to be a team on a high going into the playoffs, which is going to make for a fun postseason.
Sidebar. If you haven't seen it on Atlanta United's social media, the trip to Bergamo to catch up with Alexei Miranchuk and get his thoughts, tremendous work by the Atlanta United social media team to fly over and get his early thoughts about coming over to be a part of Atlanta United and get him into a car at Hartsfield-Jackson International to start the journey. Very, very cool. Once again, they hit another home run for 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Didn't feel like it at all, and that's the sign of a great piece that they put together.
Yeah, Alexei's been cool to get to watch a little bit and get to talk to a little bit. He just seems like a really chill kind of guy who is chill in terms of being off the field and vibing with people, but intense on the field. And that's an interesting balance. He's not the biggest talker on the field. He's not super demonstrative. Maybe that'll change as he gets more accustomed with this group, but he's a big personality with his skill and his talent, and it's fun to watch.
Happy birthday to one of the 4 people on the show. And it's not me, Jason, or Jarrett.
Haha, thanks, guys.
That was some interesting math, John, but okay.
Yes, it's not me, Jason, or Jarrett, so that means that it is the 4th person. So happy birthday, Madison. And how are you celebrating this trip around the sun?
Oh, I mean, well, first of all, I can now simply say, in quoting Taylor Swift, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22. Thank you, everybody.
You were waiting all week for that.
Oh, yes.
I was. I was.
I think she's literally been waiting all year.
No, actually, because I turned 21 and I was like, oh, I know what's next. I was like, I got it. No, but well, tonight I'm going home, seeing the family for a little bit.
Are they paying for dinner?
Oh, of course. We're going to get Mexican. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Big birthday cake, maybe?
Oh, actually, I don't know. Maybe.
Okay.
Knowing my mom, probably, yeah.
Okay. One candle, or 22.
Oh gosh, we normally don't do candles. Actually, I mean, I think we just do like one. I think we just do like one if we do, maybe. Okay. Yeah. But and then I mean, I'm headed up to Charlotte to cover United tomorrow, so yes. that's how I'm celebrating.
Okay, so Maddie, since it is your birthday, do you have a question for Jason about this matchup with Atlanta United and Charlotte?
Oh, I mean, I think I'm always so fascinated, especially like I go back to like the U.S. men's national team and then Panama in that matchup, just because it is a heated rivalry. Mm-hmm. And we saw the team get heated and kind of keeping that composure. How do you expect it, even if it may feel like a rivalry to some, may not feel like a rivalry to some? How do you keep your emotions in check, especially going into a game like this, where you said it's not going to be hostile, but it's going to be a little bit more of a like, hey, there's something to prove here.
Yeah, this is such an interesting rivalry, and stop gatekeeping the word rivalry, folks. Like I beg of everybody, like you can have a whole bunch of rivalries. They can all have varying degrees of intensity, and it's okay to call something a rivalry if somebody else disagrees with it. I hate the gatekeeping around the rivalry word. Charlotte's a rivalry because there's going to be a lot of Atlanta fans who are going to drive up and be in the building, just like there were a lot of Charlotte fans who drove down. Just like the same with Nashville. Rivalries can be a lot of different things. This is a rivalry. This is a different kind of rivalry, in my opinion. It has a different feel than Atlanta and Orlando. It has a different feel than Atlanta and Nashville to me. I think Nashville has gotten a little more hostile. I don't know if Atlanta-Charlotte will ever truly be hostile, and a big reason why is Anton Walkes. Honestly, I think there's always a different feel around this game, And I'll give you all the teaser. Hopefully it'll be hitting sometime this afternoon on the History of Atlanta Soccer podcast series. Sandy McAfee outdid herself with the podcast about this rivalry and specifically about Anton's effect on it. Lots of different voices in it. It was a really good listen and conversation that I was able to have with some folks, and I know Sandy had a ton of different conversations around this. It's a really good listen. Take your time with it. It's not an easy listen, but it's a really good listen, and I think like that factor in this makes this feel a little different, and I think it will for a long time and maybe forever, and that's okay. Charlotte fans are going to be really hyped for this game. They've added some good pieces in the window. Tim Ream makes that defense that's been really good even better. On the Atlanta side, you're getting Moranchuk in. Charlotte's got a 10 as well, and Pep Biel. Like, you're trying to get both of them going. Handling the emotion of it, I think, is multifaceted in this game because it will get contentious at times. Ashley Westwood's an old school English midfielder. He's going to go flying into some tackles. That's going to tick people off at times. That's okay. I want to see that emotion out of Atlanta United. I think I'm not ever as worried with the character makeup of this Atlanta United squad in getting over emotional. At times I want them to get more emotional, and I want them to be a little nastier in games like this when the tackles start flying. And I hope this is a game that can bring that out of them a little bit, because I think it's there. I just think it hasn't come to the surface yet. Atlanta's got to manage those emotions. Again, multifaceted emotions. There's not a lot of guys on the squad at this stage that, played with or against Anton in that time period. But I know for the coaching staff, it is an emotional time anytime it's Atlanta and Charlotte. It's going to be a big game past that emotion. I think that's what you have to keep in mind here is you got to manage that element of it, but this is a critical match. It's not going to end anybody's season because that Eastern Conference is so jumbled. You could go from 9th to 15th and then 15th back to 9th. Like, it's that chaotic. But because of that, every point I think is magnified a little bit. So if you go on the road against a team that's ahead of you and you get a point, that's not a bad thing. You're not playing for it. You're not going there looking for it. You're looking for all three, and you're fully capable of getting all three. But you've got to keep in mind that big picture of things here. And this is about being as strong as you can be and getting stronger every single game over these last 8 and finishing in a playoff spot and finishing on a big upswing going into that postseason. It's not going to be easy, but this is a good test along the way to get there.
Jarrett, what's on your mind for Jason this morning as we preview Atlanta United and Charlotte?
Okay, so as far as putting together that midfield, this is something that we've kind of seen coming over the horizon with Alexei Moranchuk being a part of it. How do you, and it's going to change. I know it's easy to want to write a midfield out in pen and to carve it into stone, but with the guys you have and the games you have that are going to be different, and styles make fights, how are you lining up this midfield this week?
It's a good question, and I think you can go a couple different ways. I mean, I think you have really two templates that you can look at here when you're talking about the midfield and how you incorporate Moranchuk. You can do it in the way that we've seen this team play lately, which is in a 4-3-3, so a 3-man midfield, and don't get hung up on 6 and 8 and 10. I know it was like a huge conversation about Jay Fortune playing higher up the field in the last game, and well, if Moranchuk comes in, he's going to take his spot. Like, Fortune wasn't a 10. Like, the game was taking him into those roles, and he was going higher than Sleesh was in this because in the long term, Sleesh is going to be a deeper lying midfielder because Moranchuk is going to get into those spots as well. But 6, 8, 10 in the way this midfield works, it's not rigid. It's not to say that a 6 can't get forward and a 10 can't come back. So don't get hung up on that stuff. If Moranchuk is in this midfield and you keep that current situation, he might look like an 8 at times. He might be deeper than you think. I don't think he's purely going to be just a 10 that sits underneath the striker and doesn't do anything defensively. I don't think that's what this team's going to look like. I don't think that's what Rob Valentino wants this midfield to look like. I don't know if you can really do that in the modern game as much anymore. Your forwards got to defend. Your 10's got to defend. Your defenders got to be able to attack. That's just the nature of where soccer is in 2024, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So if you have the 3-man midfield and you slot Miranchuk in, you're talking about a combination of 5 guys. It's Bartosz Slisz, who I think plays if he's healthy. Jay Fortune, who right now is playing at that level to hold that spot. Tristan Muyumba is dealing with a hip issue, and Rob Valentino said he was day-to-day yesterday, which makes you think that maybe he's not available for this one. Dax McCarty, who's not going to be able to play 90 minutes in all 8 games coming up. And you have to pick your spots. Is it 90 sometimes, or is it 60 sometimes to start, or is it coming off the bench for 30 sometimes? Probably all of the above. I don't think it's going to be 90 minutes in every game left for Dax McCarty. I just don't think that's going to happen. So, and then Miranchuk. So do you play in this one? Is it Slisz, Fortune, and Miranchuk? Is it Slisz, McCarty, and Miranchuk? Is it Slisz, McCarty, and Fortune? It's one of those combinations, because I just don't think Tristan Muyumba being talked about as day-to-day is going to be able to start. Maybe he can come off the bench, maybe not. The other template that you can look at is what we saw this team do earlier in Rob Valentino's time, which was that 5-2-3, 3-4-3 kind of a shape. So 2 central midfielders, but in the way that you have the personnel right now, it can almost turn into an attacking midfield box, where if you do that and you play 3 center backs and you play 2 wing backs and then 2 central midfielders, if let's say that's Slisz and Fortune, because in that kind of a setup, yeah, I think it's Miranchuk not in one of those 2 spots. So if you do that, and let's say Slisz and Fortune here, then you're looking at 2 wingers, and you have 2 wingers, in air quotes, in Saba Lobjanidze and Alexei Miranchuk, who can play wide and come inside into the pockets. So you get kind of narrow in this situation, but if you play Miranchuk off the left, which he played a good bit for Atalanta, and he comes in on his left foot, and you play Saba Lobjanidze off of the left side, Miranchuk off of the right cutting in, Lobjanidze off of the left cutting in on his right foot, which we've seen him do, and then you have your forward. That could be another way to get something out of this group in a different kind of shape. And I don't think that's going to be the first template, but I think that's something that we could see over time with this group potentially. And it doesn't dramatically change what you're asking Miranchuk to do or Lobjanidze to do in those situations. It just changes where your strengths and your weaknesses are. And it's going to be down to the opponents that you're playing to see what works. In the run of play, that setup worked extremely well against Real Salt Lake, who's one of the best attacking teams in the league. It blocked them from getting the ball into those attacking players in the run of play. Remember, they scored 3 goals on set pieces. That was a 5-2 game. Take 3 goals from set pieces away, which is not run of play, which has nothing to do with the shape that we're talking about. That's a 2-2 game. That's a very different game. That is a possibility. I think the 4-3-3 is probably the more likely situation. And if Miranchuk is in that central midfield, I think you're going to see him drop from time to time, and it's going to look as much like an 8 as it does a 10, as maybe occasionally a 6. I don't think he drops as deep and as often as Thiago Almada did when he played that role, but I do think he'll play from a deeper position at times. So, 3-man midfield, I think you have 5 guys, and one of them is listed as day-to-day, and one of them can't play 90 minutes every game. So I think you can start to figure out how you make that work over the run of these 8 games.
Jason, Maddie, and Jared hanging out with us here on the morning show as we preview Atlanta United and Charlotte. So, Jason, in your analysis of Charlotte and knowing what you're seeing from Atlanta United, where do you think Charlotte is at its weakest? Where do you think Atlanta United can do their most damage in looking at Charlotte? I remember last time it was an entirely different setup at Mercedes-Benz. They picked on Nathan Byrne, and it was a long day for him in a very short amount of time. Where do you think Atlanta United can attack Charlotte and be the most effective, you think?
You pick on Nathan Byrne, and you try to make it a very long day for him, because when you look at the back line, the weaker elements are wide, and the stronger elements are central. You add Tim Ream to that center back group with Malanda and I think Andrew Privet, who's been one of the success stories in the MLS Super Draft. And then you also look at the rest of that midfield with Westwood, with Bronico. It's a really good midfield. So the spine is very strong. The weaker spots are out wide. I think the Red Bulls did a good job of that. And if you've listened to the MLS six-pack, Jessica Charman talked about that. The wide play is a concern on the Charlotte side. It can be an advantage on the Atlanta side. You've got to get more out of the left side for Atlanta. You can't get one-dimensional with the right. But I think you also need to get Brooks Lennon into more attack-minded spots. And that's something that they haven't done as much of in the last couple of games. And you want to get him into those spots because you look at the quality of the crosses that he's delivered, and he's among the best in the league. I think some people argue with the stats, but he is. Just facts are facts. I don't think the stats are trying to lie to you. Like he's completing more crosses than a lot of right-sided players, wingers and fullbacks in general. I'd like to see him have the ability in the run of play at times to come back inside, which we've seen at times. But that means somebody has to be wide. That means whether it's Moranchuk drifting out there, whether it's Lobjanidze drifting out there, you've got to have a wide option on that side, but you want to make it a little harder to predict. On the left, you just got to produce, and Amador, I think, has been solid going forward, maybe a little bit more solid than we thought. Sean De Silva or whoever else is playing on the left wing, you've got to get more production there. And that would be the side that would be going at Nathan Byrne. So, it feels like a game where if it's Sean De Silva starting, and I've talked about this in games before, he's one of those guys that I feel like if you get him going early, he can be a problem and a nightmare for an opponent. I think you need to test it early. I would try to get him in behind. I would try to get him isolated with Nathan Byrne as much as possible, running at the Charlotte right back, and see. And if Byrne starts to struggle, well, then you see the weakness, and then you can keep chipping away at it. Then Amador can get forward a little bit more. Then whether it's Moranchuk drifting there, whether it's Fortune, at times Sleesh, starting to put more pressure on that side. When you find the weak spot, I think then you have to really put pressure on it to break it down. And I think that would be it. We'll see. You've got to be at your best to make that a weak spot as well. So we'll see if that happens.
Maddie, what's on your mind for Jason as we continue the conversation with Atlanta and previewing Charlotte?
Ooh, I'm trying to think what questions I have because I don't know what y'all already asked.
Well, we could also talk about the twos in Chattanooga this weekend. We can talk about the college game. Anything's on the table.
So many things.
Yep.
Because we are going to be crazy and go up to Chattanooga after the weekend that we're all having.
Yes.
Because why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Also, do love Chattanooga. Chattanooga, it's a fun little stadium. I loved going up there for WPSL. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, I think the twos in Chattanooga might be my next question for you. It's a unique game. They came to us, we played, and we also then went to them already, and we've played again. What needs to be done in order to see more success coming out of that matchup and more of another rivalry as well, kind of, for Atlanta United?
Yeah, it is a rivalry. Chattanooga is always up for a game against any Atlanta team, whether it was the old Atlanta FC when we went up there and ruined their opening game party in 2009, whether it was the old Silverbacks, whether it's Atlanta United first team in Open Cup games, whether it's Atlanta United 2. Chattanooga is always up for it. And I think that's the challenge here for the twos is they've got to be up for that intensity because, look, it's tough. And Steve Cook talks about this all the time. This isn't a team in the normal sense. It almost has more of like a national team feel with guys coming in and going out of it. So you don't have the same team building kind of elements that you would because you're going to have guys from the first team that drop down. You're going to have, academy players who are stepping up and you need to give them a game and you need to see how they handle it. So lots of different factors that go into it. And this one is a little interesting for the twos in the sense that the first team plays the day before. It is a short trip to Charlotte. I hope we'll be back home. I think I might actually be asleep by 1 a.m. this time around. And then, it's an easy trip for guys to make it up there. We saw this with the game in Huntsville where some players didn't play in the first team game the night before. Now that was at home. But again, Charlotte's a short flight. And guys made the trip over to Huntsville day of the game and contributed. And maybe you see that again here. So the twos might get some reinforcements. We don't know yet. But you just have to manage the intensity of the game, because Chattanooga will bring everything they've got in front of their fans. Their fans will be up for it. Their fans hate any team from Atlanta, and they will be all kinds of riled up. So Atlanta United 2 has to be able to play at that same intensity level, especially early. It's going to go up and down, and that's okay. But you can't get behind the 8 ball, and you can't let that intensity multiply early if you can't match it. If you match it, then both teams, maybe it becomes a little more of a stalemate in terms of intensity, and both teams have their ups and downs. But if you are getting overrun early, if they start flying in on tackles, they start knocking guys over, the crowd starts roaring, then they just keep growing, and it's hard for you to get to that level. So you've got to be physical and intense early in that game for Atlanta United too.
Jarrett for Jason as we continue the weekend whip around.
And we're going to go back to the first team because I want to figure out, you started to talk about it, and I don't know how much you did, trying to get something out of the left side, however you have to do it. Consistency has been an issue all season for Xande Silva. He's had spurts where he's been really good, and then spurts where it just hasn't worked. Whether it's creating overloads, whether it's guys floating around, however you do it. I mean, what else do you do on the left-hand side to try and balance out production that you've gotten more consistently on the right, even if it hasn't been perfect?
It's been pretty good on the right. When you look at what's Saba up to right now, I don't have the stats in front of me. I think 6 and 7 or 7 and 8 in terms of goals and assists. Lennon's on 6 assists, I think, maybe 7. That's a pretty good right side. The left has not been anywhere near that.
I was going to say, especially when the left side hasn't been.
Yeah. So, like, the right's been great. The left has been a deficit for the team, and that's something that has to change. Like, the work rate has been there, and this is where I have so much respect for Xande Silva, because you see guys like him who are super talented and love their 1v1s, and when it's not on for them, they don't give you anything else. And that's not Xande. Like, Xande has worked hard defensively. He's won the ball back for this team pretty consistently. He's been a much better defender higher up the field than I ever thought he would be. So the work rate has been great from him, but I don't know what the magic situation is, honestly. Like, it is just down to producing more. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but you just have to get goals and assists from that side, flat out. And it's not happening enough. And if it's not Xande, then, is it Edwin Mosquera? Is it Saba moving over to that side and then potentially hurting your right side, which has been very good, because you've got to get in production from a Mosquera or a Silva on the right, or a Tyler Wolf or a Luke Brennan. I mean, all are possibilities, and you've got to find a way to get something out of that. Now, I mentioned it. Moranchuk does give you some different potential things you can do, because, yeah, he can play wide, and he can play wide from the right. And I don't think that's what they want from him in the long term. I think you want him as a 10 pulling the strings centrally. But when you're trying to find a way to get results in 8 games, and you've got Brooks Lennon who can stretch the field on the right and can be that wide player, making the opponent have to deal with them, and Moranchuk, who would be cutting inside because he's not a traditional winger, it could work. But that's not your first or your second or your third choice. The problem is you got 8 games to make those choices and find some combination that fits. And that's just the challenge that Rob Valentino has had this season, and it's the challenge that Gonzalo Pineda had before him. The left side's been an issue all season long, and we have seen every permutation of left wing, left full back, left wing back that you can imagine, and none of them have worked to the level that they've needed to.
Yeah, you were right. Saba is 6 and 7, and Lennon has 6 assists. Since
so 6 goals and 13 assists from the right side from your 2 players who have mostly been there. That's pretty good.
Yep. Charlotte. When it comes to looking at Charlotte, and I would, once again, I would steer folks to the 6-pack that you and Jess do every week. But when it comes to Charlotte in and of itself, is there anyone, for someone who hasn't really seen them and spent a whole lot of time looking at Charlotte, who worries you the most when it comes to Charlotte on offense?
Patrick Agimon, because he's a monster up top. He just physically is a tough matchup, and he fits the way that Charlotte generally wants to play. They are a defend first, get that part of the game right, and then we go get what we can get in the attacking half. So they're going to be direct more often than not. He's a perfect forward for that because he is willing to go knock guys over. He has the ability to time his runs and get in behind, and he has the speed to make all of that work. So it's just a huge challenge. I mean, Stian Gregerson is a big dude and he can run. That's going to be something that you see multiple times in this match of a ball played over the top. And whether you start Ajiman or you have him come off the bench, for me, he would be a starter every game, especially in the way that they want to play. Whenever he's in there, if he comes in off the bench, that can be even more challenging because you're a little tired at that point and he's fresh. But they're going to play balls over the top. You're going to have to turn and run at your own goal, and you're going to have to deal with a guy that you might bounce off of.
Yeah.
And that's just a very difficult matchup. You know, they haven't been able to get the best out of Lee Elevada yet. Pep Biel is new to this group, so they haven't, you know, he's played 24 minutes. It's kind of the same situation as Miranchuk. Brandon Cambridge is coming back into the mix as well. We've seen him with Crown Legacy. He's back from injury. He's another strong, willing, attacking player, more from a wide position, who can make your life difficult. But Ajiman's the one who scares me just because it's a very difficult matchup, whether it's at the start or at the finish.
Maddie with Jason and Jarrett and me on her birthday here on a Freestyle Friday. What else is on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was so interesting is how kind of like almost, I don't want to say 180 because Charlotte still has that defensive like outcome, but they took the summer window and they ran with it. They got a whole bunch of new attacking guys that can really create threats as well. It's interesting. I'm excited to see kind of what Charlotte's going to bring to the table in this matchup as a whole, because it's going to be a little bit different than what we're used to. And I guess it kind of is the same question as John's, but I mean, kind of looking at that and kind of seeing the differences in between what they were from what we saw them back in May to then now, what would you say are like the clear differences in what we can expect from the matchup?
I think the difference is they're even better defensively. I think Tim Ream makes them even better. And long term, and I said it on the Six Pack when we talked about Ream signing, he's going to pay dividends, not just now with him, but he's going to pay dividends over time because he's going to make Malanda better. He's going to make Privet better. He's going to make any of those young players better. He's, you know, one of those guys that for whatever reason, the hashtag USMNT crew have not really liked him very much. Too old, too slow. He started in MLS. He's one of the best center backs this country's ever had. And he's a very different kind of center back than this country's ever had because he's maybe part Spanish. Like he's that kind of center back. He's classy on the ball. So I don't know if you're going to ask him to be that guy as much. I think what you're going to ask him to be is an organizer, a leader, a veteran presence, a calming influence at times. You're going to ask him to do those things. But, and I think this will happen just because of who he is as a player, they are now better in terms of having patience, building out of the back when it's on. They're not going to risk it. They're not going to be dedicated to it. But when it's there, he can pick out a pass. And that gives them a little bit different element. So I think the attacking pieces they added are going to be important for them. But the headline of their summer was adding Tim Ream and what he does to make a team that's conceded just over a goal per game. I think they're even better defensively now. So that makes it even more challenging to go and find a goal on the road.
Jarrett for Jason and Maddie and me.
I'm going to ask you something really unfair, which is
oh boy,
the interview you did with Garth
and Dimitrios, which was very cool that he joined in. I did not expect that until kind of the last minute, and that added a ton of extra context of things. That was great.
Yep,
I would argue people should listen to the whole thing because
I would argue that as well.
there's a lot there that's not just Atlanta United related, but like MLS related, like grand scheme behind the curtain talk.
Yep.
If there's one part of it that you wanted to highlight to kind of scream to the mountaintops of people, what would it be?
That's a really good question, because I do say, like, you need to listen to all of it, because there's a lot of context to a lot of things in there. And to give you guys the context on like how it all came about, we have Garth Lagerwey on our radio pregame show almost every game. And the games that it's not him, it's Carlos. We've had Jonathan Spector as well. It's a credit to the club that they've been willing to do that. I don't think there's any other club in Major League Soccer that does that. It is what the Atlanta Falcons do, for example. And it's a segment that I always love in the Falcons pregame, when Rich McKay comes in and is talking more big picture things. Not about, I mean, you can bring a lot of different people on to preview the game in front of you, and that's what we do. We can do that too. It's bringing somebody like Garth, and in the Falcons case, bringing somebody like Rich on to talk about league rules changing. And that's been a topic of the last, I don't know, month plus, where things have evolved, and, announcement would be made, or the Wiley transfer would happen, the Almada stuff, like all of it. And it's all like, wow. And I'd ask him one time after we finished, I'm like, I think it would be a great opportunity on a longer form situation to sit down and talk about these rules changes and how they affect you and the rest of the league, and maybe what's to come. And Garth was totally open to it. And I said, you know what, let's wait and do it after the window's done. And it doesn't need to be a distraction during the window. Let's do it after the window is done, and let's have that conversation. Garth was open to it. And then bringing Dimitrios in as the cherry on top, because he worked in the league office and he knows a lot of the, not just the what of this rule is this, he knows the why it is. And as he explains in pretty big detail, and it was something that had come up in our pre-games, and maybe this is the part to listen to when at times I think it's easy on the outside, or, you play EAFC or you play Football Manager, and you think about how contracts get structured and salary caps get managed, and, you think it's easy. When Dimitrios talks about how they structured, and this has been misleading from a lot of media in this country, by the way, and it was why I drove this point home in the conversation. They structured the acquisition costs in different windows to allow them to maximize their salary cap. So when Sabo Lobjanidze was added, when Stian Gregerson was added, when Bartosz Slisz was added, all three are that player that you can put as a designated player and get a benefit from them being a designated player in your salary cap. But you ideally like to have them not as a designated player, about as max as you can get non-DP. So the acquisition cost is always the issue with players at that kind of salary level, that kind of quality. Because the acquisition cost, if you do what some have said you had to do, which is not true, as we've learned, and that's why I think this podcast was really important. If you just amortize the acquisition cost over the life of the contract, then you've got to buy that player down over the life of the contract to have them not be a designated player. What Atlanta United did, again, to maximize how you can add players to this team and make this roster as strong as you possibly can on paper, they had the acquisition costs rolling. So, and the Slisz one is the most fascinating one to me, because to do that, and Dimitrios talks about it, you have to have a club on the other side who is willing to take that money later. Because in the case that Atlanta did this, they didn't amortize it. They didn't say, okay, well, we're going to pay you in 5 installments over the 5 years of his contract. No. They said, we're going to pay it up front. But Legia Warsaw, in Bartek's case, because he was the last one of the group, his hits next year. You go to Legia Warsaw and you say, look, we're going to pay you. We're good for it, obviously. But will you take it here? Because in our league structure, it gives us a benefit to not have that acquisition cost be paid and hit our cap and hit his salary cap hit. Now it gives us a benefit for that to happen in 25. And they agreed. And that's part of negotiations. That's why these are not simply, I want to sign this player. Player says, I want to go to that club. And then the other club just says, okay. That's not how this works. You're not pushing buttons. You're not watching the wheel spin and seeing if the computer manager on the other side agrees. You have to finesse. You have to talk. You have to find these ways through. And that was such a creative way to do it that I had never heard of in the league. I don't think it's ever happened in the league, to be able to have 3 players come in that are of that ilk, who would be designated players in a lot of situations, but to have them on a rolling basis. And this also, remember, this was with the previous designated player roster setup, where you needed one of those guys to be able to maximize your U22 spots, to have them, which could give you cap relief in other places. Now the rule has changed, but the way that you structured it, it gives you the ability in 2025 to buy down Bartosz Slisz with the increased allocation money that you get from the Caleb Wiley transfer and the extra allocation money that you get because you didn't sign the additional designated player. And they talk about that in the podcast. Go listen to it. They talk about how all of that went, and it wasn't easy. And the window timing is a factor in it. I know that got a lot of headlines in the last month in terms of the league conversation, that because the window ended 2 weeks before Europe ends, that it's hard. And it is. And that's true. Absolutely true. But the way it worked out, you added Moranchuk, you have 1 designated player spot open. So you take the new thing that came in the summer with the 2 designated players and 4 U22s, and that wasn't their plan. And it wasn't until they didn't get a designated player that they opted for this. But it gave them an extra $1 million in discretionary GAM.
DeGom.
A new term, DeGom.
DeGom.
But you get that on top of the 3 for Caleb Wiley's transfer, that now gives you that ability to buy Bartek's acquisition cost down, so he won't be a designated player next year, and you can go into the market and add 2. So it, like, to get to that level of specificity and to get to that level of detail and to have a club that willing to tell you, we did this. And then when that acquisition cost was paid, then this player became the designated player. And then that acquisition cost was paid. And then it was going to be this player. But now, because we've been able to take advantage of X and Y and Z, that player won't be a designated player and we can buy somebody down. So we will have 3 designated players and we will have 3 max non-designated players and the ability to have 3 U22s in whatever capacity you use those for. And as we're seeing in the league, one way you might use that, and Garth talked about it in a pregame segment a while back, if Caleb Wiley transfer had not happened and you had a way to potentially keep him for a longer term, you could have signed him to where he would fit in the U22 initiative. And that's where I think clubs will use that. And Garth talked about it. It was probably a month ago. Somebody like Jay Fortune could fit into that. If you want to re-sign a new deal with Jay Fortune, you could sign him to a salary amount that is more than his cap hit because you could fit him into that U22 initiative, and that gives you a benefit. So there's lots of different ways to construct this stuff, but the amount of detail that was given in that conversation was amazing. And I mean, as somebody who knows a pretty good bit about the MLS roster rules and has tried to not just know what the rule is, but the why as much as we can. And I've watched this league grow from no designated players to 1 to what it is now, and the whys along the way. It was really cool to get that in depth. And I don't think it was that in depth with going over people's heads. I thought it was explained pretty thoroughly, pretty clearly, and with good enough detail that I hope it gives people insight into the thinking. And now you go into this January window, and it's going to be a very, very busy time between now with 8 games left in the season, trying to get into the playoffs, trying to make as deep a run as you can, to having a lot of ability to add some top tier talent for 2025 and beyond.
Off the Woodwork, go to 92.9 The Game, go to the podcast section. Off the Woodwork, it's about 53 minutes total with ads. So 45 minutes of content. and they mysteriously just right in the middle of a soundbite, just bang, here's a 3-minute ad break.
And then, I wasn't able to control that part, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know it's automated and how they determine things with length and all that kind of stuff. No, it was a very eye-opening conversation that went a lot of different directions that I don't think anybody has ever had the gravity to sit there and just break in and sit there. Yeah, we'll go ahead and talk about this. We'll talk about we'll talk about how it applies, how we can spread it across the roster, all these different things with Garth and Dimitrios. It was a really cool conversation that you were able to have. Must listen, bookmark. Abby gave the link in the Twitch pitch. Like I said, it was a blast to listen to because it broke down a lot of different things and how the team is approaching things and how Major League Soccer is approaching it with windows that you're having to fight with European windows and European clubs and all this kind of stuff. So must listen, underline, exclamate, italicize, boldface, all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuggets in there, and just big thanks to everybody with the club for allowing it to happen, and most of all, big thanks to Garth and Dimitrios for. There was nothing that I wanted to ask about that was not allowed. There was nothing that we couldn't get into, and then they went beyond what I was getting into to bring up more things. So it was very, very cool and a great conversation, and we probably could still be sitting there talking about it if we didn't have other jobs.
No doubt. Let's see. Really quickly before we get out of here, it looks like Strasbourg has confirmed that Georgi Petrovic is going over there from Chelsea. Crystal Palace agrees Nottingham Forest to sign Matt Turner as a new keeper. He's a replacement for Sam Johnston, who went to Wolves. Speaking of Southampton, finalizing a deal for Noel Buck on loan from the Revs, according to Gimme Sports, written by Tommy Scoops and Ben Jacobs. And so keep the chaos going. It looks like Chelsea is now submitting an offer for Jadon Sancho. Still, we're trying to figure out where Victor Osimhen's going to go.
How many players does Chelsea have at this point?
2 weeks ago, they had 53 available.
Well, they've been busy in the last 2 weeks. Like, I think it was 43 a couple weeks ago when I yelled and screamed about it on AST. And I know they've added and I know they've subtracted. Why are they still trying to add?
Because they're Chelsea.
But why? Like, okay, I'm going to end on this.
Sure.
You've got Raheem Sterling. You played him in preseason.
Now you don't want him anymore.
You don't want him anymore. And Jadon Sancho's better? No, he's not. Are you high? Like, no. Like, I'm sorry. Raheem Sterling would fit that team and play well. You don't like him and whatever. Fine. Okay, that's fine. You don't like him personally. You don't like that he got mad and posted wanting more clarification because you left him out of the lineup and all that. Fine. Whatever. You're not getting better by adding somebody else who's not as good. By the way, and he's probably going to have to, or I guess somebody else would then have to go train with. Why do they call this the bomb squad in England? That makes no sense. That's ridiculous.
Unless they were just bombs when it comes to not hitting.
No, that's stupid. That's stupid because they're not. A lot of these guys are not in this case. It's because Chelsea can't go through the checkout line without buying the shiny new toy.
Oh, I know. It's like going to Sharper Image and wanting everything.
It's like going to CVS and ended up with 27 different USB-C chargers because they're at the checkout.
Oh, I like that color. Oh, I want the pink 6-foot cord.
There has not been a team in a long time that the way that they are run and the way that they do things that has angered me as much as Chelsea Football Club right now. And sorry, Chelsea fans, like, it's not your fault. Your manager's not in a position to do the best that he can because he's got the island of misfit toys. Pochettino was in the same boat, and he said, "You know what? I don't want off this island. This is stupid. Get me a boat."
Peace out.
And it's ridiculous, and it's a disservice to the club. Get somebody in there with some intelligence, and I don't know, this thing called a plan, and maybe follow said plan, and maybe not sign 530 feet, 33 first-team players. Maybe try that.
Yeah,
I'm out.
Yeah, okay, so he's out. I was going to say broadcast plans for the weekend. We got the Twos and we got Atlanta United. So Jason, I thought Jason was coming back in to talk broadcast plans because I thought he was going to teach that.
God, I was going to just leave, but anyway.
Yes. Yes.
I am flying to Charlotte this afternoon. Then Charlotte tomorrow, 6:30. Five Stripes Countdown with Abe and Garrett. That's from the studio at Colony Square. Kickoff at 7:40 from Charlotte. Then I'll be on a plane. Then I'll fly back. Then Sunday, we will be all over the place. I will be at Center Parc Stadium to call from the studio Georgia State women and Western Carolina. Should be a good game. That is Sunday at 1 o'clock. Maddie will be in Brookhaven at Oglethorpe for their home opener with their women's team. And then Sunday night, we will all reconvene like the Avengers and drive to Chattanooga and Finley Stadium, and we will have the broadcast of Atlanta United 2 and Chattanooga FC from Finley Stadium. Pregame coverage will start at 6:30 for that. Kickoff will be just after 7. And then Monday, we will be at Emory University for the first of 2 matches between the Emory Eagles and the Oglethorpe Stormy Petrels in men's D3 soccer, 2 of the best teams in the country. They're in our backyard. Pre-game coverage we will have on our social media platforms. We will get post-game reactions as well. It's part of the Sonny Carter Invitational. That happens all weekend over at Emory. Belhaven is the 3rd team in the tournament. So Emory plays Belhaven on Saturday afternoon. Oglethorpe plays Belhaven on Sunday afternoon. And then Oglethorpe and Emory play each other on Monday night. So it's a busy weekend in the SDH Network universe.
Now go.
Adios, everybody.